So today we have with us Dr. Michael Greger, the owner-operator of the website nutritionfacts.org, which is the world's largest collection of peer-reviewed research on nutrition, on the connection between nutrition and human health. If you haven't seen the website nutritionfacts.org, I highly recommend going over there and just looking at the quality of the information that he and his team put together on every possible variable in diet and every possible variable on human health. Dr. Michael Greger is a New York Times bestselling author who wrote the book How Not to Die. It's a brilliant book. It's like, 800 pages long and basically answers every question that you could possibly have about the connection between diet and human health. And he constantly travels the globe. For the last 15 years, he's been traveling all around the world, educating physicians, educating people, and speaking at large medical conferences about the research findings. He reads every single nutrition article in every single journal published every single year. This guy leaves no stone unturned. So we're very fortunate enough to be able to interview him today, specifically about type 1 diabetes, about insulin resistance, about what is sugar really, and about whether or not moderation is actually a smart thing when it comes to diet.
And if you've ever seen a Dr. Greger video, you might notice that he's walking on his treadmill. He walks, I think it's like 18 miles a day. He's always walking on his treadmill. So that's always fun to see.
Absolutely. And he has this very sort of sarcastic and hilarious tone about him where he gives you these incredible analogies about, simple ways to think about human health. So we hope you enjoy this interview. He's a very entertaining guy, and he is one of the world's smartest doctors right now in human health. All right, so Dr. Greger, you recently released some videos on nutritionfacts.org about the connection between cow's milk protein and the risk for developing type 1 diabetes. So can you go into a little bit of detail between the connection?
Yeah. In fact, let me see. I could look through some of those scripts. Those are actually kind of a complicated story. So originally I thought it was the casomorphin, which is a kind of a polypeptide breakdown product of casein, one of the principal proteins in milk, that was that was triggering autoimmunity. Basically, it was what's called molecular mimicry. Basically, this particular dairy protein looked a lot to our immune system like certain parts of our pancreas that create insulin. And so our body sees this foreign bovine protein and mounts an antibody response to it to attack this foreign protein. And unfortunately, our pancreas may get caught in the kind of crossfire, in the friendly fire, and result in autoimmune conditions. In this case, would be type 1 diabetes. And so there's this fascinating kind of detective story as to how researchers came upon this. Attention has then shifted to, well, actually, maybe it's not. So we know that, for example, infants raised on cow's milk formula, have higher rates of type 1 diabetes. The question is why? And so initially we were looking at casomorphin. Then it's shifted to bovine insulin. Actually, bovine insulin is the same as human insulin, but our body's not used to seeing insulin in our digestive tract. When we eat bovine insulin, consume bovine insulin, our body's like, what is this? Particularly an infant. Infant has a leaky gut on purpose. Why? Because intact proteins need to go through the intestinal wall. Why? Because that's where our infant's passive immunity comes from. The mother, through breast milk, transfers some of her own antibodies into the system of the infant through breast milk. But that means intact proteins actually need to get through the intestinal wall. So our gut is designed to be leaky during infancy to absorb those protective maternal antibodies. The problem is is that that's why we don't want foreign proteins, proteins from other species going into our mouth, particularly at that age, because then they can get into the system. The body can be like, "What is this?" So it may be the infant's body is actually attacking bovine insulin, and then our insulin producing cells, our beta cells in our pancreas, get caught in the crossfire. Fascinating story. So there's all these interventional studies where you can actually split groups of kids up and use something called hydrolyzed formula, which breaks down all the proteins, so eliminates that problem. Anyway, the whole series is up at nutritionfacts.org. It's a fascinating detective story. Encourage people to check it out.
So this is great, actually, because people who drink cow's milk protein from a young age end up with this casomorphine inside of their digestive tract and then inside of their bloodstream. So they can develop antibodies to cell surface proteins on the beta cells themselves, as well as antibodies to insulin itself. And is that correct?
Just got to check. So, yeah, it is correct. However, some of the early hydrolyzed cow's milk studies were rather disappointing in terms of significantly reducing the risk. And so it may indeed be some of these other bovine proteins that are to blame. But regardless, what we do know is that drinking milk from another species at that age, and so it could be, the same thing with donkey milk and camel milk and other kind of milks, increases one's risk of type 1 diabetes. Now, of course, part of that could be the some protective properties of breast milk. I mean, if you're eating dairy milk formula, by definition, every suck is one less suck of human breast milk, which may have protective factors. But they've been able to tease through that by comparing, for example, to soy milk formula, which doesn't have the protective benefits of breast milk, at the same time doesn't have those bovine proteins. And so you can kind of tease out some of these interesting issues. Again, it's a bit of an oversimplification. It's a rich body of now interventional data, not just observational data where you actually follow populations, just try to make some correlations. Actually, some interventions, some randomized trials, and that's what I go into in this in-depth video series.
Love it. It's great.
Really, really fascinating. Okay, so the diabetes community in general is terrified of eating fruit because it has sugar. So can you explain why is the sugars in fruit different?
Well, first, I think it's important to recognize that blood sugar is a symptom of diabetes, right? It's not the cause of diabetes. I mean, our bodies were designed to be able to eat natural sources of sugar, and our blood sugars go up, blood sugars go down. That's what insulin's for. That's how our body's supposed to work. It's insulin resistance. Well, I mean, that's, of course, if you have insulin, if you're not a type 1 diabetic. But normally we're designed to be able to do that. However, if people develop insulin resistance, meaning our body tissues, particularly our skeletal muscles, are resistant to the effects of insulin, then that causes prediabetes, causes type 2 diabetes. And so that's the cause. And the result is you have really high blood sugar levels because your insulin isn't working well. And so there's kind of two things you can do. You can treat the symptoms by trying to reduce blood sugar levels, so by starvation, all sorts of things you could do to keep your blood sugars low because your body's broken. Or you can fix your body. You can get rid of the insulin resistance. You can treat the cause of the very disease in the first place, and then eat all the fruit you want. Eat all the natural, whole, healthy foods you want without a problem. Now, the reason I say healthy food is because one can kind of cause problems by eating what's so-called industrial sugars, high fructose corn syrup, table sugar, and the reason that eating a beet is fine, a sugar beet is fine, but eating the sugar, table sugar, which is mostly from beets, is not fine, is because, of course, the refined sugars didn't exist throughout our millions of years of evolution. Our bodies really can't handle it. What happens is we get this rapid rise in blood sugar because there's no fiber involved. And so our blood sugars shoot up in a way that our bodies really don't recognize. And so we have such an overshoot of insulin. Our pancreas releases this huge surge of insulin to drop our blood sugars down, so much so that our blood sugars actually are driven down so low we actually become hypoglycemic. Our blood sugars drop to below fasting. So before we even ate that sugar, our blood sugars are even lower. Our body freaks out, thinks all of a sudden we're in a famine situation or something because we have lower than fasting blood sugars, and releases all this fat in the blood. That's the triglyceride surge, and causes all sorts of stress within the body. And so that's why we shouldn't be eating these added sugars, these industrial sugars, stripped of their fiber. And so we get these surges in our blood. So even people who aren't insulin resistant shouldn't be eating these excessive industrial sugars, can lead to accumulation of fat in the liver, high blood pressure, all sorts of bad things. Okay, so but wait a second, why isn't it's the same kind of sugar that's in fruit. Why doesn't that cause a problem? Well, initially we thought it was the fiber slowing down the absorption of sugar in our body. Fiber kind of gels in our stomach, and so slows the absorption through our stomach and small intestine. So initially we thought it was just kind of a gelling effect, a slowing down effect. But then they tried things like giving people grape juice, right, which has no fiber at all, and they still didn't get the same kind of blood sugar overshoot, and didn't get that triglycerides in the blood, didn't get that surge. And you say, well, wait a second, that's just like pure sugar. What's the difference between grape juice and just a tablespoon of a table sugar? And the difference is because these phytonutrients, these polyphenol phytonutrients that are found in healthy foods, found in grapes, and other whole healthy foods, that actually partially block the absorption of sugar into actually at the small intestinal lining where we absorb blood sugar, actually slows right at that level the absorption of sugar into our bloodstream. And so it's interesting, even fruit juice doesn't seem to cause that problem. I don't encourage people to eat fruit juice because you're missing out on the fiber, missing out on all the nutrients that are attached to the fiber, but it just shows, and you can demonstrate this experimentally. So for example, if you take people, I have a video where, gives people a couple tablespoons of table sugar with water. They chug it down and they get that surge of fat into the bloodstream. And then what if you add some pureed berries in addition to all that sugar? So you eat all that same amount of table sugar plus the added sugars found in the berries. You'd think, wow, you'd have even more of a spike. Worse fat in the blood. In fact, the opposite happens. You don't get that. You get a kind of protective effect. Even with the added sugar within whole fruit, it actually makes things better. And that's not only the fiber, it's probably the polyphenols, these phytonutrients as well. And so we should eat food as nature intended, in its whole form out of the ground.
That's really great stuff right there. So I would assume, so you said while you were talking there that, not just whole fruit, but whole plant foods. So these same principles would extend to rice and potatoes. Is that correct?
Well, we want to eat, so whole food. So it's important to differentiate. So we don't want to eat, these so-called white foods, white rice, white bread, white pasta, etc. We should eat, whole grains, brown rice, or even better red or black rice with these anthocyanin plant pigments. And we should, eat whole grain pasta, or even better bean pasta, these lentil pastas and all these exciting new legume pastas on the markets now. And sweet potatoes are actually healthier than white potatoes. And so, there's these simple substitutions we can make. Foods are not so much healthy or unhealthy as they are healthier or less healthful. And so the question is white rice good? Well, compared to what, right? Compared to, Egg McMuffin, absolutely, right? But compared to brown rice, no.
So, okay, logical follow-up question here. You started by talking about insulin resistance. You said, insulin resistance is oftentimes the root cause, or pretty much always the root cause of blood glucose rises. So what can somebody do to reverse insulin resistance, and how do they even know that they're insulin resistant in the first place?
And so, I mean, that's the really exciting thing is that we didn't think. I mean, for a long time, same thing with heart disease. We didn't think heart disease was reversible. People get worse, 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 and then you die. Same thing with type 2 diabetes. You get worse, worse, worse. You go blind. You know, go on dialysis, get some amputations, then die. And so the best modern medicine could do is kind of slow down your diabetes, slow down your blindness, slow down your kidney failure, slow down the development of your heart disease, and then all of a sudden, ta-da! We learn, starting in 1979 with Ornish, but then the first randomized controlled trial proving heart disease reversal in 1990, July 23rd, with Dr. Dean Ornish's landmark lifestyle heart trial. And the same thing with diabetes. We used to think diabetes was reversible, and if you don't think insulin resistance is reversible, you don't think diabetes is reversible, then it makes sense to try to control blood sugars, right? It's just like if high blood pressure was not reversible, it makes sense to go on blood pressure pills because having high blood pressure is bad for the delicate, tissues in your eyes and your kidneys. Oh, so you want to, reduce your risk of stroke. You take blood pressure pills to force your blood pressure down. But wouldn't it be better, if it was possible, wouldn't it be better to treat the cause, right? The cause of high blood pressure is not drug deficiency. Right, the cause of type 2 diabetes is not insulin deficiency. In fact, you typically have really high insulin levels as your body's trying to overcome the insulin resistance. The problem is your body's not working right. There's some problem. So and most of these are lifestyle diseases, primarily dietary diseases. So by cleaning up your diet and eliminating your high blood pressure, well, then you don't need pills because you got rid of the problem in the first place. Same thing with heart disease and same thing with type 2 diabetes. If we could not cure, reverse, push into remission type 2 diabetes, if we couldn't get rid of insulin resistance, then all these crazy things to force our blood sugars down would make sense, like the fasting, the ketosis, and these horrible diets and insulin injections and all these oral hypoglycemic medications. Because look, your body's broken, can't get better. What are you going to do? Then you got to do the best you can do, right? If your leg is amputated, you need to have a prosthetic leg. Well, what are you gonna do, right? You can't put your leg back on. Thankfully, with type 2 diabetes, it is reversible. So all these treatments that trying to push your blood pressure down, all you're doing is treating the symptoms. You're not actually treating the cause. Now that we know you can treat the cause, of course, that's what you should do. You should fix your body and not just kind of deal with the symptoms. Which will never really get to the root cause. And so how do you reverse insulin resistance, reverse type 2 diabetes, reverse prediabetes? Well, what's the cause of insulin resistance? And the primary cause is what's called intracellular lipid, which is kind of sciencey speak for saturated fat mucking up insulin signaling within our muscle cells. Which deals with most of the blood sugars. Basically, our liver and our muscles pretty much maintain the levels of blood sugar in our bloodstream. And so when we have saturated fat lodged in our muscle cells, they interfere with that insulin signaling, and so we develop insulin resistance, and so then blood sugars rise in the blood because it can't get into our muscle cells. Because insulin is kind of the key that unlocks the door to allow sugars to get into our muscle cells. And so what's gummed up to lock saturated fat? So what do? We reduce our saturated fat intake, and very rapidly we can reverse type 2 diabetes, reverse insulin resistance, prediabetes. Now, there's two places you can get that fat, though. One is through your mouth by eating a horrible diet. And the other is your fat stores, particularly your visceral fat, the fat around your abdominal organs, kind of your internal belly fat. And so you can have people eating really healthy diets who are obese, but still have problems with insulin resistance. And that's because the levels of fat in their blood is really high, but it's not coming from their mouth. Digestive tract, it's actually coming from their bloodstream, from their fat stores spilling into their bloodstream. So weight loss is critically important. But you can get that same kind of insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, in a skinny person if they're eating a horrible diet. If they're eating a bacon butter diet and all this saturated fat in their system, it's as if you get the same levels of free-floating fatty acids in your bloodstream as if you were obese. So obese on a healthy diet or skinny on a kind of low-carb diet, you get the same levels of fat in your blood, which can lead to the same levels of insulin resistance. So you need a combination of both. You need a healthy diet, and you need to lose the weight and type 2 diabetes can go bye-bye. Now, you can do that with surgery, bariatric surgery. You can, it's about 80% effective in pushing type 2 diabetes into remission. But basically, that's just an artificial, it's basically like jaw wiring. You're basically changing people's diets where you're forcing them to eat very small meals.
Food, yeah.
Otherwise, they get sick and it can be painful. And all right. And so, wouldn't it be instead of forcing people to eat smaller meals by either wiring their jaws, locking them in a room, or rearranging their anatomy, how about eating healthier meals, right? Then you eat all the food you want by improving the quality rather than reducing the quantity. And so then you don't have to worry about it. Your body naturally comes back to health, reversing some of our leading killers like high blood pressure, heart disease, and type 2 diabetes.
It's actually really cool to hear you say all this, actually, because what we do, we run an online group coaching program where we teach people living with type 1 diabetes, type 1.5 diabetes, prediabetes, and type 2 diabetes how to reverse insulin resistance. And a lot of people in the type 1 diabetes community don't believe that insulin resistance even pertains to them. But we show over and over again that you can become insulin resistant by eating a single high-fat meal. So by adopting a low-fat, plant-based whole foods diet, even people with type 1 diabetes who, like you said earlier, they're skinny, they're normal weight, they still can develop insulin resistance and then reverse that insulin resistance and drop their medication requirements at the same time.
Yeah, these experiments, these aren't, we're not talking about like observational experiments where you look at thousands of people and, oh, look, those people who eat fatty diets have more insulin resistance. No, we're talking interventional studies, right? A single meal.
Exactly.
One meal, increase in insulin resistance. You can do these fancy, basically fMRI, these functional MRI imaging. You can actually detect the amount of fat lodged in your muscles and do what are called insulin clamp studies, where you actually detect exactly how much insulin resistance you're having right now at that very moment in time. You can even do blinded studies and say, how do you do a double-blind randomized study? People know what's going into their mouth. All right? Maybe just thinking you're eating an unhealthy meal screws up your system. Well, no, what they can do is they can actually infuse fat into your bloodstream. They stick an IV in you, and they click one switch or another, one that infuses fat, one that infuses just saline, salt water. And when fat flows into your bloodstream, all of a sudden you can measure the spike in insulin resistance immediately. We're talking hours after a meal. So this has been, this has been proven, in these interventional, studies. You can just show it. The data is right in front of you. It's not controversial. What's controversial is compliance, right? So when I say, look, when I show this to doctors, when I show this to my colleagues and say, look, the evidence is clear, this is what they need to do. What doctors will say is have this patronizing attitude saying, oh, yeah, but my patients won't do it. I can't even get my patients to stop smoking. There's no way they're going to eat like this, blah, blah, blah. Okay. And so, okay, that may be true for some of your patients, but that's not your decision to make, right? That it's not your body, right? So you should present this evidence and look, and then if they want to continue to eat unhealthy, they want to continue to smoke and go bungee jumping, do whatever they want. It's their body, their choice, but you should at least give them the option. And you should tell them the predictable consequences of their actions. Okay, if you do this, you have, type 2 diabetes. This is what you're looking for. You're at high risk of everything from heart disease and stroke and blindness and kidney failure, et cetera, et cetera. If you continue down this path, or you can actually treat the cause, get rid of this disease. Look, I'd be happy to put you on insulin, put you on all these drugs, keep ramping up your insulin, put you at risk for all sorts of things. But it's your choice. But you should know that you can reverse the disease in the first place by following this diet. You may not like following this diet. It may be at odds with what your family is eating, with what your friends are eating. It may make for awkward social situations. But, showing up with a below-the-knee amputation could also be a little awkward in social situations as well.
So it's a perfect segue, because one of my favorite things that you say all the time is that moderation is not the answer. So can you go into detail about what it means when people say, oh, as long as you eat a moderate diet, you're fine, right? True or false?
Yeah, well, look, everything in moderation may be a truer statement than many people realize, right? Asking diabetics to make moderate changes in diet can leave them with moderate blindness, right? Moderate kidney failure, moderate amputation, maybe just a few toes or something, right? I mean, so moderation in all things basically is not necessarily a good thing, right? We're talking, these are life or death decisions here. So the reason so I tell my patients, don't just cut down to 2 packs a day down to 1 pack a day. You quit smoking. Smoking's not good for you, so you just stop it. So sure, you can choose moderation and hit yourself with a smaller hammer, but why beat yourself up at all?